So the concept that they're missing, Mr. Speaker, the concept is moving it to conservation. Our argument is that this green economy is a development plan. It is a development plan. It's about the economy. The green is the adjective. It is not a conservation strategy. So taking 2 million more hectares of our land and putting them into protection, where? He said, Armand again said all across Guyana. But where and who are you going to take the land from? And why are you taking it out of production? And because we can achieve both objectives. We can produce and we can conserve. And the two things, Mr. Speaker, the path that this government is taking us down is a path only starry-eyed kids pursue. In international negotiations, you can't go there like babes in the wool, or walking with your unprepared. These people will chew you up. China comes to the negotiations at the UNFCCC or at all of the other fora, and China argues China is a 10 trillion US economy on purchasing power parity. It's bigger than the United States of America. But China argues for growth in carbon emission until 2030, not to reduce carbon emissions now, in absolute sense. They argue for growth because they dare to protect their country and growth, etc. We have the lowest, Mr. Speaker. If you look at the sink of our forests and our emission, we're probably already not a net emitter of carbon. And we yet want to go and be the good boys of the world. So we want to lock away all of our resources and take away the possibility of our people earning, making money, Mr. Speaker. And this is the approach, conservation versus development. And so we argue that concept. We're under no obligation to cap our emission level. Never were. The pledges that were made through the INDCs were pledges that were not well thought out. They could even affect future development of hydro because the watersheds that they're going to pledge there may be affected. 2 million hectares. And so we're busy pursuing that, Mr. Speaker. And because we have changed from development rather than conservation, to conservation, we have gone against the consensus of developing countries. The SIDS and many other OASIS that have argued that money for adaptation should come so that the international community must help us transition that path. Guess who we are going to tax for it now? Our people must pay for this. And if the United States of America, Mr. Speaker, we don't know how climate negotiations would evolve in the United States of America. We have heard all the signals that they plan to repudiate the Paris Agreement and the obligations therein, to reverse what the EPA has done, the standards set there. So a ton of carbon emitted here and a ton of carbon emitted in the United States has the same impact. Mr. Speaker, for 1 year, all the carbon we emit in Guyana would be equivalent to 2 minutes in the United States of America. 2 minutes. And we now will save the world by greening, planting trees here, not addressing the fundamental justice issue. So the sea would rise and we'll be green under the sea. Because we can't stop the rising sea level if those countries don't meet their commitments. It is, Mr. Speaker. So bring me back to this measure here and how it relates to that. The measure to support our green agenda. So we are doing one-off tax exempt, Mr. Speaker. We are doing tax exempt and one-off 2-year tax holiday on wind and solar energy investments. Now, Mr. Speaker, this seems to be self-serving. We know there are two reasons why. I saw about 5 megawatts of power would be purchased through solar energy for isolated systems, not base load, because the only base load that is really a starter now is the hydropower for base load station. The isolated systems, yes. So we saw about 5 megawatts in different parts, Bartica, etc., will be built. But we're looking forward to the public procurement, because we've heard, Mr. Speaker, that the people, that agreements are already being signed. And so we heard that this would be implemented by the 17th, by April. So we'll be looking at this, and I will personally, from my office, write the Public Procurement Commission to ask them to check what competitive tender process has been pursued in this regard. I will come publicly. Mr. Speaker, the wind farm. We know who is the developer of the wind farm, Mr. Speaker. But what I find very disturbing, and to tell you, Mr. Speaker, we heard the Honorable Member, Mr. Ramjatan. You've heard the developer of the wind farm project being described by members in this House as a key financier of the AFC. And he said, so what? You know, so what, Mr. Speaker? So what? That might not be a problem. Mr. Speaker, so what may not be a problem. But when I see, Mr. Speaker, and this is something I would like to draw to your attention, Mr. Speaker. I'm sitting in the MP's lounge, which is only for members of Parliament, Mr. Speaker. And I saw the developer of the wind farm project walking around the members of Parliament lounge. Who brought him in there, Mr. Speaker? Is this not a new form of indiscretion? I don't want to call it otherwise. This is pure... Yeah. Lay your objection.
Not an objection. On a point of order for information for the person, we had a meeting in the office of Prime Minister's office, and you have to pass that place before you go there. Yes.
I thank the honourable member.
With me. Yes.
I thank the honourable member. Please,
Mr. Speaker, I'm proceeding. That doesn't change one iota of what I said. I saw him in the launch. And the fact that they had a meeting here too, Mr. Speaker, was it about parliamentary business? Or was it about something else in this room upstairs? And so if I start, Mr. Speaker, I too have an office up there. And if I start bringing people who are working, looking for contracts, who are actively negotiating with the government now, Mr. Speaker, who are actively negotiating on big projects and getting special arrangements in these budgets, if I bring them in there, would that be acceptable, Mr. Speaker? Does it not somehow offend propriety? Mr. Speaker. So we will be looking at that too. Mr. Speaker, we will be looking. Look how worked up the honourable member is getting. Mr. Speaker, it's touching them because I don't know what they discussed in that office. I don't know what they discussed in that office. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Honourable member,
yes.
Go on, please.
Mr. Speaker, so, Mr. Speaker, we see now, so moving from development to conservation, the minister's budgets now, so he announces a few measures, electric charging station, all of which wouldn't give up revenue. So he then says, I'm imposing this environmental tax. I don't want to go to the history of the environmental tax because you would see how the duplicity of the government. But Mr. Speaker, he puts $1 billion in the budget to be collected from the environmental tax. In 2014, Mr. Speaker, or thereabouts, when the tax was imposed only on importers, it was raising over $1.2 billion. Banks DIH alone will have to pay, if they have to pay VAT on it, close to $1 billion more on these taxes. How it's underestimated grossly underestimated again. They put in $1 billion, when in the past, when it was levied only on foreign receptacles, it was, or receptacles brought in by foreign companies, it was over $1.2 billion. And one local company alone would have to pay another $1 billion. So the wrong figure. So this now finances all of these green initiatives, so-called green initiatives. That the solar panels, here, these measures, etc. So guess who's paying now? Guyanese now have to pay for the greening. It moved away from an international justice issue to more hardships on our people. It is this concept, Mr. Speaker, that I'm opposed to.